Sadhu Sahano Gunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us. May he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Om peace, peace, peace. And good evening. We are reading the complete works, or excerpts from the complete works of Swami Ramakrishnananda, who was one of the 16 direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. And we are starting the lecture on Harmony of Religions, which was originally given in Bengali at the Mysore Sanskrit College on October 8th, 1903. So, Amma, would you like to begin?
Harmony of Religions, the lotus feet of Sri Guru, be my refuge. It is only through the grace of the Lord that petty men like ourselves meet learned men like you. The company of virtuous men gives rise to the desire of knowing the truths about God and their revelations. It is only through the knowledge of the truths about God that man can absolutely get rid of the threefold miseries of human life and attain the final beatitude. Desires are created in the mind by association with the unreal, sensuous objects, whereas the company of holy men destroys them. It has been also said the company of holy men brings about desirelessness. Desirelessness brings about the cessation of ignorance. The cessation of ignorance, truth, is ascertained, and if one can ascertain the truth, he can enjoy living freedom. Therefore, it is superfluous to add that association with holy men opens the portal of salvation. In the present age, 3 great personages have been born in this land of India who have ascertained the truth, and all of them have adorned the Deccan by incarnating themselves here. The great Acharya Shankara, the very incarnation of Shiva, preceded the others. The ontological truth, Brahman is real, the world is unreal, and Jiva is no other but Brahman. This was thoroughly established by that great philosopher. That imperishable supreme Brahman alone is eternal, all-pervading, immovable, beyond time, space, and the law of causation. And his true nature is existence, intelligence, and bliss. On the contrary, this universe, which exists in time and space and is determined by the law of causation, is unreal and false. By the word false is not meant void, but that which has beginning and end and is transitory, like pleasure and pain, heat and cold. This is the import of the world according to Shankara. Of the word according to Shankara. This Brahman is the real nature of Jiva. But the Jiva, overpowered by the beginningless illusion as he is, superimposes the Atman in the physical body and thinks, I'm fat, I'm old and decrepit, I'm one-eyed, I'm unbacked. And by superimposing the Atman in the mind, he thinks, I'm happy, I'm miserable. Deluded by such false ideas, he cannot know his real nature and falls into the well of samsara, full of poisonous water. As a consequence, he gets birth, death, disease, and old age repeatedly, and suffers untold miseries, and is at last snatched away by the world-destroying time. Though he is thus taken away by time, he has to undergo all sorts of afflictions there on account of past actions. If he chances to get the company of pious men, by virtue of meritorious works, he can learn the fourfold sadhanas from them and can slowly get rid of ignorance. Just as darkness is dispelled as soon as the sun appears in the horizon, so do a man's sufferings and miseries cease when he attains true knowledge. Never can a man attain true knowledge without serving holy men. The Lord himself says in the Gita, know that by prostrating themselves, by questioning and by service, the wise, those who have realized the truth, will instruct thee in that knowledge. If only the jiva can know his real nature, he can know the Atman to be one divided existence, intelligence, and bliss, which cannot be burnt, nor wetted, nor dried, and which is eternal, all-pervading, unmoving, and immovable. No more does it return to the samsara. Bhagavan Shankara has ascertained this truth by examining thoroughly and discussing Shruti, Smriti, Puranas, history, and other scriptures.
Wow, that was a long paragraph. So the whole of Shankara in a paragraph here. And of course, this idea that the world is unreal is often thought of as one of Shankara's main teachings, but we have to take this idea of what unreal is carefully, and that's why he explained it here, that it means something that has a beginning and an end, something that's transitory. So it's similar to the dream. That's a good analogy, because when you're dreaming, it's a perfectly real dream. And even when you wake up, you still had a dream. It's not like you didn't have a dream. You had an actual dream. But the reality of the dream doesn't seem very real when you wake up. And similarly, when you wake up to the knowledge of your true nature, being one with Brahman, then your identity with a body and a mind complex in this world of Maya doesn't seem very real. It seems like more like the dream world. So that's really where the idea should be taken. And of course, again, he often says that Maya can't be said to be real or unreal. It's a strange mixture of both. And that's, again, this idea that it creates this illusory world that comes about and appears real at the time, but is actually transitory. And so it deludes us into thinking that we are this body and this mind, whereas in reality we're the infinite, undivided, unchanging spirit that's behind all of this. And so, of course, you know, I've always liked to refer to Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, where in both of those, Alice ends up falling asleep and dreaming, but she doesn't know she's dreaming. And so the whole book of all her adventures, either Through the Looking Glass or in Wonderland, are her dream worlds. And she thinks they're perfectly real when she's there. And she goes through all these things where she finds things very difficult, but then she says, oh, it's kind of curious, it's kind of an interesting place, you know. But then she gets frustrated and exasperated because things don't quite make sense and things don't seem to be the way they should be. And then she often gets into trouble, and she's afraid she's going to be killed, either by the Red Queen is going to order her execution, off with her head. So she ends up in these difficulties, and then she has to realize that all she has to do is wake up, and she's out of these troubles. So similarly, our life is full of strange mixture of things that seem kind of interesting and fascinating, but then we end up with a lot of the miseries of life and so forth. And we just have to remember, we're not really just this body and mind, and we can wake up from this and realize our true nature. All right, so this next paragraph is not quite as long, but almost. So it's a full page, so let's see how we go here.
In course of time, as the followers of his school of monism gave up the company of holy men, they lost the fourfold sadhanas. was laid down by Shankara and became unfit for the realization of truth. Thus overpowered by delusion and ignorance, they began to read quite opposite meanings in the great sayings. Having failed to grasp the true import of the great sayings, like, "Thou art that," "I am Brahman," according to the fundamental doctrines of the Vedanta, they began to pervert their meaning. The result was that they identified this gross physical body, which is 3.5 cubits high, limited by name and form, bound by the ties of attachment, and having its origin in ignorance, with the imperishable, unattached Supreme Atman, and gave up all scriptural injunctions. They were behaving like Chandalas, became almost human brutes. In order to save such deluded men from the ocean of this mortal samsara, the Lord Vishnu, the author and father of this universe, incarnated himself as Sri Ramanujacharya in the city of Mahabhuta and as Sri Madhvacharya in the city of Vidupi, thus fulfilling his own promise in the Gita. Whenever virtue subsides, religion prevails, I body myself forth. They found that men were devoid of the power of discrimination between the real and the unreal, and sixfold sadhanas, like the control of the inner and outer senses, hankering after the fruits of actions here and hereafter, and not at all longing for the salvation of their souls. Such deluded fools were unfit for the knowledge of the identity of Jiva and Brahman. Seeing the spiritual life as such a low ebb, both of them not only found fault with the meditation of Brahman in its absolute aspect, but also condemned and ridiculed it.
And of course, Shankara, when he first came, he was actually reestablishing the Vedic truths, which had been more or less supplanted by Buddhist ideas. Buddhism had sort of swept over the entire subcontinent of India, and the Buddhists also had their own kind of decline within India. And Shankara came to codify in a much clearer way the ideas of the Vedas. Before that, of course, the reason Buddhism came to rise was because the priests had sort of turned the Vedic religion into just a whole series of ceremonies and rituals that you had to get them to perform for them. And there was lots of animal sacrifices and so forth. And so that's how Buddhism then came to help to rectify that. And then as that declined, then Shankara comes and puts the Vedic truths back on track. But then, as he says, after time, not everybody is ready for these higher truths, and they begin to sort of change them to their own way. And then we have these two other philosophers, Ramanuja and Madhva, who established what are called the qualified non-dualism and the dualistic schools. And each of these are suited for different temperaments. And Swami Vivekananda used to say that all of these schools are supported in the Vedas. You can support all three of them in the Vedas, and that you might think, well, they're contradictory. But he says what each philosopher does is he has to torture the text to make it look like it only supports their particular philosophy, whether it be Advaita, Vishishta Advaita, or dualism. And so really these are three different ways of looking at something that's impenetrable to our minds. Our minds can't grasp the reality in its pure essence because it's beyond words. Words already defile the nature of Brahman, and yet we sit here and struggle to understand what's going on and what our place in the universe is, what the nature of Brahman is, what the nature of the universe is, what our nature is. And so we have these philosophies to help us. And so each of these other philosophies that came along were perhaps better suited for certain mindsets and at different times. And so now we're very privileged to have Sri Ramakrishna and Vivekananda come to explain these philosophies to us in more modern terms that we can comprehend, and so we can apply whatever school of philosophy we feel most comfortable with. And sometimes we may feel that one philosophy explains one particular aspect of life a little better than another, but not necessarily everything. And so we often mix these philosophies a bit and talk in different modes. We can think of things in terms of different ways of thinking, not feeling that they're really contradictory. They're simply different ways of explaining things when we can't really understand it until you've experienced it. All the people that have experienced the reality say that you can't really put it into words. It's really not explainable. And so all of these are simply just approximations to get clear understanding. But all of these philosophies are paths to the truth, you could say. John Dobson used to point out that a path just has to get you there. You don't have to prove whether it's right or not. It just has to get you there. And paths up a mountain, say, can be different. There might be several different trails up the mountain. And so you don't have to reconcile one path with the other. The turns and ups and downs on this path are not going to correspond necessarily to the twists and turns and the ups and downs in another path. And so you don't have to reconcile them. They're simply different paths, and all of them eventually lead to the top. All right, so now let's go on and read a little bit more about Ramanuja.
It has been proved by Sri Ramanuja that Ishvara is endowed both with intelligence and non-intelligence. Therefore, the followers of his doctrines are known as qualified monists. He styles the Lord in the form of Vishnu as Seshi, who is possessed of infinite auspicious qualities and devoid of any inauspicious quality. The creation, preservation, and destruction of the whole universe is his sport. All the created beings from Brahma down to the lowest have been proved to be Sesha. These finite created beings are the eternal servants of the Lord, deluded by ignorance and hankering after the enjoyment of sensuous objects. They have forsaken the service of the Lord and have become the servants of desires. And as a result, they fall again and again into the ocean of this mortal samsara. In the course of performing virtuous actions, or through the grace of the Lord, when they give up the servitude of desires and become the servants of the Lord, they give up the vanity of the ego and come to realize that they are themselves minuter than the atoms, and the Lord is greater than the greatest. Then they become deeply attached to the Lord and can enjoy supreme beatitude, with their mind fully absorbed in him and doing only his work by mind, thought, or speech. Then, according to the Lord's own pronouncement, O son of Kunti, there is no rebirth after attaining me, nor more do they return to this samsara.
Okay, so again, Ramanuja added this devotional aspect to it and talked about the Lord in the form of Vishnu. And then the creation, preservation, destruction of the whole universe is his sport. And so it's looking at things in terms of a slightly dualistic attitude, but still with this idea that there is this oneness of Brahman behind it all. But this is a very useful attitude. And as Sri Ramakrishna said, the devotional path is the easiest path in this particular age. So the idea is to become the servant of the Lord, and by so doing, you transcend the difficulties that you will find in life and eventually be able to transcend this realm of Maya and realize your true nature. All right, let's look at the next paragraph here.
The attitude of servitude to the Lord has been accorded the highest place also by Sri Madhava Swami. He has defined intelligence, non-intelligence, and Ishvara, and has shown their eternal relation. But he does not admit that Ishvara is endowed with both intelligence and non-intelligence. If anybody can give up the fickleness of mind and the senses, and through the grace of the Lord can forsake the servitude of the sensual desires and become his servant, then and then only he becomes blessed by attaining the supreme beatitude of human life and by getting rid of all kinds of miseries forever. He takes his refuge in the feet of the Lord, and no more does he return to samsara. All these three great men have ascertained the goal of human life to be the cessation of rebirth in this mortal samsara. Although there is divergence of opinion amongst them as regards the methods of attaining that stage, the above fact is patent enough because of their propounding different paths of sadhana. Yet there is unanimity amongst them on the following point, that they all long for crossing this ocean of samsara and knowing the Lord of the universe, for it is only by knowing him that one can get rid of all kinds of sufferings and miseries that man is heir to. Who is able to cross this ocean of samsara?
Okay, well, before we answer that question, we'll just pause a moment again. And of course, Madhva is known as the Dvaita or dualistic school, where there's more of a separation between you and Ishvara. And the qualified non-dualist recognizes that it's more like I am the vine and ye are the branches. I am a part of the whole of the universe. And then Advaita is non-dualistic, simply declaring that you are that. You are the infinite, undivided, and unchanging reality. And that's, of course, a more difficult path because we're so immersed in this realm of Maya. And so the devotional paths of either Ramanuja or Madhva is easier to actually follow as a path because it's a more devotional path, and you can use these ideas of devotion to a personal God in order to achieve the goal. And it doesn't have to be a devotion to any particular aspect. He might have mentioned Vishnu there, but it doesn't mean that that's the only aspect of God that you can be devoted to. You can pick whichever aspect of God appeals to you the most. So, all right, let's go on and see. We've just asked the question, who is able to cross this ocean of samsara?
These truths spoken by the great ones are revealed only to him who has deep reverence for the Lord as well as for his guru. Free from pride and delusion, the evil of attachment conquered, ever dwelling in the self with desires completely receded, liberated from the pairs of opposites known as pleasure and pain, the undiluted reach that goal eternal. Who's conquered the world? He who has conquered mind. The knowledge of this word comes through the senses. The objects are superior to the senses. The mind is superior to the objects. The intellect is superior to the mind. And the great Atman is again superior to the intellect. The unmanifested is superior to the great Atman, and the Purusha is superior to the unmanifested. Nothing is superior to the Purusha. That is the finale, the supreme goal. Thus, following the steps prescribed in the Upanishads, men who have conquered their inner and outer senses and have completely withdrawn themselves from the external world cross the ocean of samsara and attain that supreme beatitude of Vishnu, where speech cannot reach with mind and turns back.
Of course, also we should remember that Swami Ramakrishnananda was perhaps the most devotional of the direct disciples, being the one who did the puja to the relics of Sri Ramakrishna nonstop, and he never went out for pilgrimage like most of the other direct disciples who spent some years wandering around. He was the sort of the mother hen of the monastery in the earliest days, before Bellarmont was even established, in the earlier monasteries that they had. And he kept the flame going, you could say. And so there was always a place for the others to come back to. Then when Swami Vivekananda came back from his trip to the West, he asked him to go and establish Bellarmont. He asked him to go to the South and establish some Vedanta centers down in the South. So that's his background. And so we understand where he's coming from. You see, he's now using terms Purusha and Prakriti. Those are terms that are from the Sankhya philosophy. So it's not from the Advaitic philosophy of Shankara. So all of these different philosophies we tend to kind of mix up, which is fine. It's just that you have to realize that the words sometimes are going to be used in different contexts. All right, so we're going to continue.
If anybody can get complete mastery over the senses, be it through God's power or one's own power, or through jnana or bhakti, there is absolute cessation of all miseries for him. This is the opinion not only of our own rishis, but also of the Huns and Yavanas. Though the paths followed by men appear different, according to the difference in degree of sattva, rajas, and tamas, yet they are virtually one. Amongst the different creeds of Veda, Sankhya, Yoga, Pasupata, and Vaishnava, there are some who claim one of them to be superior to others. As rivers running from different sources run crooked or straight to the one ocean, so all the different religions, rising from different standpoints, lead to thee. Although these creeds appear to be different on account of the divergence of tendencies and aptitudes, yet the goal they aim at is one. Hence, it is quite evident that they are all true. As the different radii of a circle, taken from the different points of its circumference, converge to the same center, so do all apparently conflicting religions lead to one omnipresent and all-pervading God who is the cause of the creation, preservation, and destruction of the universe, the author of the animate and inanimate beings, who is all in all and seated in the cavity of the heart of each and every one.
All right, then we can take a break here. This is another very long paragraph. Again, it's good to remember who his audience is. He's lecturing in the southern part of India. And of course, the southern part of India has some different backgrounds and ideas than, say, you might get in West Bengal, where the order started. And so when you also when you read Vivekananda, half of his works were given in the West, given in England or given in the United States, and then the rest from times when he was in India. Vedanta, virtually all of his writings were given when he had his, nearly 25 years, I think, of lecturing to Western audiences. And so he gears all of what he says to an audience of the West. he's not doing that here. That's because he's not in the West. He's in the South, and he's carrying what he's saying to the people in the South, who you might find people having trouble with this idea that you can accept the ideas of Ramanuja and Madhva and Shankara all at the same time. That would be interfaith to them. The harmony of paths to them would be harmonizing those different kinds of viewpoints, having the Vaishnavas and the Shaivites and the Shaktas harmonizing their viewpoints. So he's speaking to a completely Indian audience and an audience of South India. South India tended to also have, and still does have, a tradition of being very scholarly and very steeped in tradition and the kinds of ceremonies that you would find coming from the Vedas. And each one would be taking certain aspects of that and focusing on it, perhaps to the exclusion, and not perhaps they weren't even that familiar with some of the other sects of India, but only to the particular sect that they belong to. And so when he's speaking about the harmony of religions to this South Indian audience, he's going to be speaking in these terms. Also, I just wanted to mention that the terms sattva, rajas, and tamas are used differently in the Sankhya philosophy than they are in Shankara's philosophy. In the Sankhya philosophy, tamas is inactivity, rajas is activity, and sattva is balance between the two. And it's when all of the forces of the nature are in equilibrium with each other that you get the dissolution of the universe back into its seed form. And when they're thrown out of balance, then you end up with creation. Shankara uses them in a very different way. He uses them in as aspects of a mistake, because he's talking about superimposing something else by mistake on the reality of Brahman. And so to him, tamas is a veiling power of tamas. So there are powers. And then rajas is a projecting power. And then sattva is a revealing power. And so in his model of the universe as how we're perceiving the universe now, first we fail to see that it's really some other idea on it, but the reality of Brahman has to show through. And so, again, John Dobson used to give the example that, taking from Shankara's, the idea of mistaking a rope for a snake, he would say, first, you have to fail to see that it's just a rope. Then you jump to the conclusion that it's a snake. But you didn't think it was a toaster or your car. Those things don't have enough similarities with a rope. You jump to the conclusion that it was a snake. Or you might have thought it was a piece of hose or a lizard or something that had a similar shape. So the reality of the rope shows through. And so in that philosophy, then, you have to realize that there are hints in the realm of Maya that reveal the true nature of the reality. What Dobson points out is you even see it in the physics. In the physics, you see the unchanging aspect in the law of inertia. Things tend to stay in motion if they're in motion, and they tend to stay in rest if they're at rest. That's the law of inertia, and that's the unchangingness of Brahman showing through, even in the mistake. And the undividedness shows through as gravity. Everything wants to fall together by gravity. And so everything wants to be at one. And in fact, you find that sort of locally in black holes. And it's interesting that black holes have an event horizon, and you don't know what's going on inside. There's a singularity. And so it's like you've passed out of Maya into the oneness reality, even in that little locality of a black hole. And then the Infinitude shows through as electrical charges, like electrical charges attract. And they would like to be as far away from each other as possible. And in fact, each individual electrical charge would like to be as big as possible. The fact that we think that electrons have a particular size is because we're seeing the infinitude as small. And you can go through some mathematical calculations of how much energy would it take to squeeze one electrical charge down from infinitude to the size that we perceive as an electron. And the energy you get to squeeze that much negative charge against itself down to the size of an electron, that energy is equal to the mass we think the electron has, times c squared. E equals c squared. The energy of the electron is seen as its mass, but its mass times c squared is the amount of energy that's in there. And so in that model, you see that the sattva shows through. And then he would point out that it shows through in us in our yearning for peace, love, and freedom. Peace is the yearning for the unchanging, which we really are, but we don't know it. And love is our yearning for oneness, which we really are, but we don't know it. And freedom is our yearning for the infinite, which we really are, but we don't know it. So that's his description of the three gunas in Shankara's terms. But most of the time when you hear about the three gunas, they're talking in terms of the Sankhya philosophy. And they're talking about dullness, activity, and balance. And you find that in the Bhagavad Gita, too. That's the way they use it. Now, if you go back to the original Vedas and you look up all the places where the three gunas are mentioned, there are hardly any. And they don't say very much about them. So the philosophers are free to do what they like with them, and they do. So that's why you find these different interpretations of what the three gunas are. They are three strands which make up Maya. And so Sankhya uses them one way, and Advaita uses them in another. All right, so let's go on with the Blessed Lord said here.
The Blessed Lord, too, says, in whatever way men worship me, in the same way do I fulfill their desires. It is my path, O son of Pritha, that men tread in all ways. Just as chameleon changes its color according to its own sweet will, and sometimes becomes colorless, so does the Lord reveal himself in various forms out of his grace for the devotees. He is at once possessed of form and formless, agent and non-agent. The Lord too says, though I am the author thereof, know me to be the non-doer and changeless. Bhakti leads easily to him. For taking refuge in me, they also, O son of Priti, who might be of inferior birth, women, Vaishnavas as well as Sudras, even they attain to the supreme goal. What need to mention holy brahmanas and devoted royal sages, having obtained this transient, joyous world, worship thou me. It should not be maintained that this bhakti is to be found only within the four corners of India, for the Huns and Yavanas too follow the path of bhakti. The Buddhists too have bhakti for the enlightened one. O Vishnu, in the form of Buddha, thou dost condemn the Vedic rituals accompanied with sacrifice of animals. Victory unto thee, O Hari, Lord of the universe. Here Jayadeva acknowledges that Buddha is an incarnation of the Lord. It has been also shown in the Bhagavatam and other Puranas. Therefore, all the religions can lead a man to God. But this should not lead one to forget that it is better to die by following one's own religion. It is terrible to follow another's religion.
All right. So again, I have to emphasize that he's talking to a South Indian audience, and he's blending the different paths within Hinduism. That's his main focus here. So, Krishna in the Gita really is the first harmonizer of different paths. Each of the chapters is given the name of a particular path. And so you find in the Bhagavad Gita that Sri Krishna has also, in one volume, talked about many different spiritual paths and ways to realize God. Now we'll just take a moment here, since we're almost out of time. We can finish this up next time, and we do have some music we can play next time, so we'll do that. But tomorrow is Shivaratri, so I wanted to invite all of you to at least join us online. If there's still some worries about pandemics and spreads and outbreaks and so forth, so you might be a little timid to come in person, and it's hard to maintain a lot of distance if there are 100 people crammed in the temple. We do ask people to wear masks when they come, and the high quality masks, the NK95s or the N95 masks. But Shivaratri is a wonderful celebration of Shiva. And again, it's interesting that Shiva represents in the Nataraj form. The camera's not going to pick it up, but we do have a Nataraj over there. We don't have a cameraman moving things, so. But of course, there are three different images that we often see of Shiva. One is Shiva meditating in the Himalayas. Another is the Nataraj Shiva, and the other one is in the most abstract form of the Shiva Lingam. So in the Nataraj form, you see that Shiva represents all the different aspects of creation, preservation, and destruction. In the usual way of describing the trinity of Hinduism of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, Brahma is the creator, Vishnu is the preserver, and Shiva is the destroyer. But I like the word recycler better because the universe is said to go in cycles. But all of these deities, all these aspects of gods are really windows to the infinite. And so when you become a follower of any one of them, you begin to see all the aspects in that particular one. And so this is a very good example of that. The Shaivites see all these aspects in Shiva. So he's dancing the dance of the cosmos. He's got a little damaru, which is vibrating the vibrational nature of the universe into existence. This idea that the universe comes forth in vibration. That's a very common theme in a lot of different religions. It's where you get, in the beginning was the word. So when the word is spoken, there's a vibration. The Native Americans used to cry or chant the creation of the universe into existence every morning. In the Egyptian philosophy, it said that the Lord cried the universe into existence. Cried out, not crying in tears, but cried out. So this is a very common idea. So he's creating the universe with this dance, with a rhythmic dance, and with the rhythm of the drum. And then he's keeping the demonic forces out of control. He's going to balance the universe in all its different aspects. But he's got a circle of flames all around him, and so this represents the cycle of the whole universe and dissolving the whole universe back into its source. So and then, of course, the Shiva Lingam is the most abstract image that any devotional practice could use. And it's also interesting that it's a very ancient symbol of a pointed object and a circular object. In fact, many monarchs will hold a sphere and a spear or some sort of long object. And those are like the scepter and the sphere, and those are considered their royal power, their power from the divine. They were thought of as divine representations on earth, and that's why they could rule the kingdom. And so this idea of a a circular object and a straight object forming the universe is also very prevalent. And it always amuses me that our whole digital world is made up of circles and ones, zeros and ones. You get the whole universe made out of zeros and one. And so the creation of the universe is often described as a stone falling into the infinite ocean and creating vibration. So that you get this vibrational idea again. And so this interaction of the Shiva lingam in the yoni really represents, again, that origin of the creation from these two sources. All right, so that's enough for tonight. You can hear 3 talks about Shiva tomorrow night. In between the 4 watches, there will be a talk. And so they will talk about various stories about Shiva and aspects of Shiva in those talks. And so you're welcome to join us. The first watch is 2 hours long. The other 3 watches are each an hour long, and they're separated by a half-hour break in between. So if you can join us in person, wonderful, but do be careful not to crowd other people and to always wear your mask. And if you can't join us in person, you don't even have to brave the LA freeways. You can just go on, brave the internet freeway and get online and enjoy the atmosphere of the holy celebration in the comfort of your own home. All right, we'll close with a chant. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Om, peace, peace, peace.